Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to introduce Geneva Lift, who is a senior staff associate at the Columbia University Climate School, jointly appointed between LEAP and the National Center for Disaster Preparedness. For over a decade, Geneva has worked at the intersection of climate and international development at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society, the Inter-American Development Bank, Global Affairs Canada, and the International Development Research Center. Geneva holds a master's degree from McGill University in Geography and Development Studies and has published her research in climate risk management, climate and development, and natural hazards. And we are excited to hear her talk today. Thanks, Geneva.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Because with my bio, I am a social scientist and I've been working on sustainable development for my career. So this is going to be a little different than some of the other talks. It is geared towards a general audience, but please feel free to ask some questions and provide any commentary. So my objective today is to give you a high-level overview of a landscape assessment report of AI for climate and nature. I wrote this under Pierre Gentin's leadership, so he's the director here at LEAP, and it was a collaboration between the Columbia Climate School and the Engineering School, and we wrote it in collaboration with the university at Albany, State University of New York, and Esri. This landscape assessment report was commissioned by and produced in collaboration with the Bezos Earth Fund. And the fund recently launched a $100 million AI for Climate and Nature Grand Challenge. So the purpose of this report was to help inform and guide some of those philanthropic decisions. The objective of the report was to identify the current use cases of AI in climate and nature and to tease out some of the emerging opportunities at the nexus of those two fields. So we also did a scan. Oh, I want to let you know that if you want to have access to this report, it's a really useful resource. You can scan the QR code. I think I have it again at the end, but happy to share the link with you. We also created a key stakeholder and initiative database, and I think there's about 300 different stakeholders in here. Also on that URL you can find, so you can scan through sectoral area or location to see who is doing what in this field. So my presentation has a couple goals. It's going to be a high-level overview of all the different ways that AI is being applied, and I also want to be a little provocative. I'm a social scientist. I am not an AI specialist. I'm not even a computer scientist or a data scientist. I'm a development practitioner. So I want to make you think outside of the box. And up until about a year ago, AI was not so much on my radar. Of course, climate data for decision making was what I had spent my career thinking about. But I'm trying to push the boundaries here a little bit and get you all to think a little outside of the box. So I'll start by presenting the findings from the landscape assessment report, some of the key concepts. I'll go over several use cases across several sectoral applications, demonstrating how it can be applied and is currently being applied. And then I want to think about the key considerations to ensure that AI does more good than harm in this world. I want to look at the opportunities and enablers for transformative change and end with some closing remarks. I also want to take a moment to identify my positionality and where we are. We are on unceded ancestral territory and homelands of the Canarsie, Munsee, Lenape, and Wappinger people. I myself am a Canadian settler born on Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan. So why are we here? This is not a surprise to anyone in this room. We are facing dual crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. We know the climate is changing. Last week, we broke 2 records. We are witnessing massive floods, wildfires, and hot tub ocean temperatures. Scientists believe that we are in the middle of a mass extinction event, and of the 9 planetary boundaries that keep this Earth livable, we've already breached 6 of them. Clearly, transformative, systems-oriented changes are needed. Can you guys all hear me okay? My mic just changed. So Okay, good. So AI does offer a way to better understand these vital and complex problems. And if applied strategically, it can help us to dramatically accelerate the pace of solutions to our world's most intractable problems. It's helpful when we want to kind of communicate what AI can do in this space, to think about it in terms of a few key capabilities. What can it help to unlock? So, sort of at its core, AI has an ability, an unprecedented ability to process and digest vast quantities of data from various sources. So, it can merge images from cameras, drones, remote sensing satellite imagery, sensor data, and microphones. It can sort of, it's unprecedented, and humans cannot do this alone. What this enables is automated monitoring. And so, through the use of variety of different sensors, AI can be used to monitor environmental changes and their impacts near real time. This can help to inform decision making with useful applications from monitoring deforestation, monitoring species distribution, and even agriculture. AI can also help to optimize solutions. So, being able to sift through large volumes of data and examine constraints and alternatives, it can find optimal or close to optimal solutions. We're seeing this on the manufacturing floor, all the way to the electrical grid, and even applied in traffic management. AI can also build predictive models and forecasts. You all may have heard this recently, being here at LEAP. When it's trained on abundant data, it can effectively and accurately predict future outcomes. This ranges from weather predictions to crop yields, all the way to carbon sinks and fluxes. AI can also develop realistic simulations of the real world, known as digital twins. So, digital twins are sophisticated and accurate computer simulations of an object, of a process, or a system. AI accelerated digital twins can allow scientists and stakeholders to experiment without risk as they explore the impact of certain actions on environments. We see this being applied currently from the building scale to coral reef ecosystems, all the way to the global climate systems, digital twin Earth. Also, AI in this climate and nature field can help to accelerate new discoveries and sort of aid scientific experimentation. It's already uncovering novel solutions, leveraging its unique ability to process and digest vast amounts of data across disciplines, and its ability to learn nonlinear and intricate relationships between data. AI is currently driving innovation across a range of innovations from lower carbon cement, cement that can adsorb carbon, to new battery designs, and also to even new protein food sources. So, with that sort of overview, thinking about those ways that it can be applied to these problems, I'm going to provide you several use cases across many different industries. This is a rapidly changing and emerging field, so this is going to be a very high level overview. All right, so I'm going to start with food and agriculture. That's where I've worked most of my career. So, AI in this space is being applied primarily to precision agriculture. So, with the use of many on the ground sensors, weather monitoring, unmanned aerial vehicles, remote sensing images, smartphones, and sensors in the soil, AI is able to help improve agricultural decision making on the ground to sort of maximize outputs and maximize yields. It's also being used for pest and disease detection, and I'm really excited to show you an example in the next slide. And being able to leverage AI and its monitoring capabilities, it can help to improve the timing of fertilization, irrigation, when to apply fungicides, herbicides, insecticides, and help you make decisions on when to plant, sow, and plant and harvest. AI is also being utilized to help predict crop yield based on location and weather condition, to help inform further decisions about optimal farming strategies, and also to assess crop suitability to certain areas. We also see AI being applied in the food system more broadly. It can be used to better forecast food demand by looking at historical sales data, weather patterns, socioeconomic indicators, and it can help to adjust these forecasts and reduce the supply so that we're not overproducing and we're not wasting food. This can ultimately lead to a more efficient supply chain. With the supply chain, AI sensors can be used to monitor and adjust conditions within storage facilities. There's a huge amount of food waste that occurs from farm to consumer, especially in the developing world. And so if we can better understand the conditions for storage and transportation, we can improve the life cycle of perishable goods and reduce waste and energy consumption. This is critical also to reduce the food insecurity around the world. AI is being applied for genomics, so coming up with new varieties with different flavor profiles, nutrition, and resilience. They're trying to embed drought tolerance or flood tolerance into new varieties using AI. And it's also developing and creating new protein sources. So it's not just the lab-grown meat, but even identifying new proteins that from legumes that can be used for vegan cheeses. This is also one of the areas that the Bezos Earth Fund is supporting with its $100 million grant. We also see applications in livestock. So sensor data can help to detect disease and optimize food and animal well-being. So really applications across the board. This is an example of how AI-backed solutions for agriculture can be used for decision support. So this is using cotton, so a non-food crop. And there's an input where it detects whether or not there is a significant amount of a pest. If it identifies that the action threshold has been breached on this camera trap, it can provide recommendations to farmers. And this is taking place, I believe, in India. So to smallholder farmers, and help to provide them with an indication whether they should act, whether they should spray pesticides, or whether they should wait and watch. So I think these are really cool local small scale applications of AI that can hopefully make a big difference for smallholder farmers. Now I'm going to turn to land management. So AI is used to measure carbon and biomass. It can monitor land use change and land cover change. It can monitor ecosystem health and also help to implement and evaluate restoration and conservation initiatives. Currently, forestry agencies are already using AI-augmented mapping tools to support conservation and governance. So this is an example from one of our partners, Impact Observatory, who uses deep learning to transform satellite imagery into land cover maps to monitor global change across the globe. AI is also being used for carbon accounting. So it can help to improve the monitoring of carbon sequestration efforts and the integrity of the carbon market, which is critical for climate change mitigation. Anytime you see net zero, they're really relying on offsets. And some recent studies have come out that said offsets really aren't working. So it's really important. AI can validate and enhance the monitoring, reporting, and verification for carbon markets to avoid over-crediting or inaccuracies, to ultimately reduce emissions and enable more transparent validation. So an example is to validate reforestation efforts for the voluntary carbon market. I've also included a screenshot from Methane Watch, which is an AI-backed tool and technology that can track methane emissions across the globe. One of my other favorite use cases is for conservation and species. So AI is being used for the real-time monitoring of wildlife populations to help inform wildlife conservation strategies. So this is primarily taking place through computer vision and bioacoustics, so through microphones. Here's an example from Conservation X Lab demonstrating what the computer vision training looks like when they're trying to track species of leopards. And the example to the left is Google Tidal, who is working to improve ocean conservation through sustainable fisheries. Bioacoustics is really fascinating, and a lot of times you can't necessarily see the species that you're tracking, but you can hear them. And there are applications utilizing microphones to help understand how degraded lands, formerly degraded lands, are recovering based on the diversity of bird species that have come into the area. We also see a ton of applications in oceans and coral reefs using these technologies. So another use case for bioacoustics, and I had a video, but I won't be able to show it, but it's to help monitor vector-borne diseases, such as malaria, with smartphones. So there's two organizations, Humbug Sensor and a Buzz, out of Oxford and Stanford, respectively, who are using machine learning to crowdsource acoustic surveillance of mosquitoes. So basically, they are asking for local residents, citizen scientists, to record the sounds of the mosquitoes and send them into this app who can basically Shazam mosquito sounds to identify which species are going to be present. We also know that in a changing climate, the vector of pests and diseases are changing, and so we can expect to see more vector-borne diseases in new areas. So this type of technology is really really innovative. And one of the things I like so much is citizen science is an important part of the AI for climate and nature landscape. So I love that we can empower citizens without having this massive high technology lift just with their smartphones. So now I'm going to shift to renewable energy. This is the third area that the Bezos Earth Fund is investing in with their $100 million grant. And I want to showcase renewable energy integration. So with the move to renewables, the power grid is becoming more complex. Renewable energy sources are unevenly distributed. This is geographically and temporally, and outputs depend on variable environmental conditions. So AI can enhance the coordination, storage, use, and distribution of renewable power more efficiently and effectively than traditional systems. We see it being applied in smart grids, so forecasting both renewable and electricity demand, in planning, so optimizing renewable layout, location, and production. It can also optimize grid operations, so maximizing the output from solar panels and wind turbines using weather forecasting. And it can improve maintenance using digital twins to help identify early faults. We also know that faults are one of the causes of devastating wildfires we've seen proliferate. So this is really important work. Here's an example from DeepMind, predicting output of wind farms and based on weather, and then identifying the actual output. So it's being utilized to improve renewable energy integration. Now for the built environment. So AI can be used for smart buildings and cities. This is including optimizing energy efficiency for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. This is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the world. It can be used with digital twins of buildings. So looking at HVAC systems, the thermal properties of windows, and energy use in order to enable retrofitting and optimization to reduce carbon emissions. It can also monitor and optimize waste management processes in cities and water utilities. I think these are two really fascinating examples. There's a couple startups that are utilizing computer vision in waste facility plants to help improve the recycling and waste reduction in different cities. And also with water utilities, AI is being used to look for leaks in municipal water systems and help for predictive maintenance. AI is also being used in urban design to improve energy efficiency of cement production. I have this bolded because cement production contributes 8% of global carbon emissions, which is quite shocking. So getting that right can have a huge impact in the world. And there's a lot of different AI-backed initiatives that are actually reducing the carbon intensity of cement and also improving the circularity of other building construction materials. It can also be leveraged to design and optimize urban layouts and tree placement in order to reduce heat stress. This photo is an example from Treefolio NYC that has created a digital twin of New York's tree canopy. Heat stress, by the way, is not equally felt across the cities. Tends to be occupied in lower income areas. So it's really an important thing to focus on. Transportation. So moving right along, AI can reducing traffic is also a huge priority to reduce carbon emissions. AI is being used already to optimize routes, can leverage satellite data to map the routes and networks. It can be used to reduce congestion and cut wait times, and even can change traffic signals real time. Or redirect drivers to less occupied roadways. Google has a project called Green Light that is aiming to reduce the starting and stopping of cars in intersections where pollution, I believe, is 29 times higher than in other areas. We're also seeing AI used more and more for electric vehicles. So this can be used to improve existing infrastructure, but also to optimize the placement of new EV charging stations based on routes and enhancing the capacity of batteries. As I mentioned, it can accelerate new discoveries. And even for this, to improve renewable energy integration into the grid, it is being utilized to improve and can be utilized to improve vehicle to grid optimization. So giving power back to the grid through plugged in cars during times of peak demand. Autonomous vehicles, of course, this won't come as a surprise. AI is being utilized to optimize routes, optimize and improve autonomous public transit, which could be a really interesting use of AVs. AVs currently pose the risk of potentially increasing traffic on roadways, which of course would be a perverse incentive. But yeah, there could be opportunities to have more autonomous public transit. And we're even seeing modular rail transport, electrified modular rail transport that is being autonomously driven by at least one startup called Parallel Systems, which was founded by a bunch of SpaceX engineers. So a lot of different use cases in transportation. In industry, in manufacturing, we often see it being applied to 4 key areas. So process optimization. This is basically making things more efficient so industrial actors save money by reducing the use of resources. So it can have the benefit of reducing material use, reducing waste, lowering energy consumption costs, and there are tons of private sector actors in this space leveraging AI basically for optimization. It can also contribute to quality control, support with predictive maintenance, and is involved in the human-robot collaboration ergonomics. In heavy industry, AI is playing an important role, both in optimizing existing production and also discovering new materials for replacement. So as I'd mentioned, some innovations in cement, also we see some innovations in steel making. Now, for the other part that I'm sure will be a bit more exciting for you folks, at least I hope so. Use case of climate and weather forecasting. I assume this is why you are all here. We know that AI-based weather forecasting is now on par or even better, dare I say, than traditional physics-based forecasts for weather. Google's GraphCast came up with a 10-day weather prediction that had unprecedented accuracy in under 1 minute and could be run on a desktop computer. AI can also be used for monitoring weather events and extreme events. So we're seeing it utilized in monitoring floods through satellite imagery, remote sensing. This can also be used to support parametric insurance, so to reduce the risk of folks suffering from those extreme events, and also wildfires, which we see there's a few different use cases, which is very exciting. One is Alert California, which is an AI platform that provides early wildfire confirmation and actionable real-time data to rapidly scale fire resources. There's AI that Cal Fire is actively utilizing AI to improve its monitoring and response and recovery operations. So this is like a real live use case that I think is very exciting because, of course, right now we're dealing with the 5th largest wildfire in California's history, I believe. Not to be a downer. And climate predictions and projections. So of course, we see that this is an emerging field. There are a lot of challenges, but it is increasing the speed and accuracy. So we're here. LEAP is an example, Schmidt Futures and M2 Lines as well. Some of the challenges when we think about using AI for climate predictions and projections is really the resolution of global climate models and if they can actually be useful for local adaptation. Are they granular enough that decision makers can act on these models? And also, how do we deal with uncertainty? How are we quantifying and communicating uncertainty if decision makers and policy leaders are going to be utilizing this information to make decisions? An example that you may have heard in the hallways here, but also that we have in our report is we reported on a NASA question, I guess, a research question. Is there an opportunity for large language models in the co-production of climate impacts, of understanding climate impacts? So is it possible as a future use of AI that we could create a chat GPT type query that could put out climate projections and climate predictions, sort of enabling the accessibility of this type of science and data for decision makers who might not have the science, the data background? So lots to explore in terms of the future. And then where I want to end, we've talked about monitoring, we've talked about predictions. What happens when there is a disaster? Well, AI can help to identify communities more likely to incur damage from an impending disaster event. It can also help to expedite damage assessment. So utilizing drone technologies, for example, satellite imagery. And it can identify the potential for cascading events and better coordinate response efforts. So here I've given an example of, I guess it was a competition called XView 2, which basically sought to elicit code to see who could better identify and categorize the severity of damage to buildings and infrastructure in disaster affected areas. And it was found that through this technology and utilizing AI, it was able to do so significantly faster than conventional methods. And this was actually utilized in response efforts in Turkey after a recent earthquake. So those are use cases. Does anyone have any question? I mean, I know this was a very high level overview and a lot of different material. Any questions before I move on to some of the more philosophical exploration of this talk? Yeah.
Oh, sure. I think earlier in the presentation, you talked about how there were like 9 boundaries in nature or something.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What are the 6 and what are the 9?
I can send you, if you look at the 9 planetary boundaries, it's like pollution, carbon cycles, like plastic in ocean, that kind of like geochemistry, species, like stability. I can send you those, but it's the planetary boundaries. So 9 planetary boundaries research. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm very interested.
I wonder, could you comment on like, are these kind of proof of concept use cases? Are they like really disrupting these industries? Like,
So that's a question we've been asked many times, and because we weren't really able to quantify it, I think that it is disruptive. Some are still needing to be scaled, and some work in some contexts better than others. And so I'll kind of come back to that. But there, yeah, some areas are more nascent, but you're already seeing like, yeah, the wealthy folks who can manage AI precision agriculture, got it. Optimization on industries, got it. You know, so it kind of does vary, but there's a lot of details in the report if you also want to dig in. And any others?
Yes, this isn't like a fully formed question, but I was curious if you have any opinions, maybe like more on the social science side, on like how you see this breaking down, like based on like different stakeholders. Because like you mentioned, like urban planning, so like building new neighborhoods. To me, that seems more like a, if someone comes up with a really good way to build neighborhoods, then it's like getting policy or like neighborhood councils to agree.
Yeah.
But if it's like concrete, then it's about getting like companies who produce concrete to adopt those things. So
Yeah.
I'm curious whether you see like significant differences between the like in terms of adoption and stuff, like whether there's some different breakdown based on who the like AI innovation or data thing is like relevant for. Because
Yeah.
the actual climate solution needs to be implemented in like the physical world, right? So
Yeah.
monitoring just tells you what you like should do.
Yeah.
So are there like different challenges for, actually doing whatever the like
I mean, there's
program tells you?
there's huge challenges, and this is all new. Like every time I submitted a draft on this report, I had to redo my chapter because things would change. It was painful, but yeah, we'll see. There's a lot of hurdles utilizing just full AI, especially in a policy context because of trust and privacy concerns. So, like, that's, I think, where we see a lot of potential, but also a lot of stalled potential because nobody wants everything to be monitored. And certainly no one wants their AC turned off automatically by an AI bot when it gets too hot, right? I think private sector, anyone who's set to profit from this and has the resources, I think we'll see more adoption. But yeah, it's an emerging field, so I think it varies right now. But I do think once we can get some governance structures in place to build a trust of the people, we'll start to see it ramp up, and as long as it's financially viable.
Yeah, I think Ryan was very much sort of aligned with this, and you've answered part of it. I think I think can you like draw a straight line basically between these sort of vertically integrated sorry industries like something like the agriculture, where there's basically someone who has control over both the how to like manage the ground versus sort of these public cases where I think I agree with Sammy. I mean, like you can optimize the lights all you want. In New York, they will still just run into the box and stand there. So like, what do you do? Like, is it not like, are there more sort of low tech efficient ways to that you weigh against sort of the AI?
That's a good segue, if you don't mind me. Yeah. So I want to come back to this. And so now what I'm really passionate about and what is people are asking it. So it's not like this is new, but it was a big focus in our report to make sure that we weren't just saying, hey, there's these shiny use cases, everybody and Jeff Bezos put your money into AI. And this is why I also work in the university, because I get to ask these questions and I don't have to worry about my boss being mad about it. So I want to talk about ethics, equity, inclusion, governance, and sustainability. So many discussions about the responsible use of AI to address societal problems consider issues of ethics. Primarily, we see this revolving around privacy, data privacy, intellectual property rights, transparency of the algorithms, so understanding how these decisions or these outputs are being made. Also accountability, if somebody is utilizing this or putting a policy in place based on an AI recommendation, who's ultimately responsible? And also trust and trustworthiness. Do we want AI making all the decisions in our lives for us? When we think about this from nature and climate perspectives, we also need to zoom out and consider that there are ethical considerations on the environmental impact of AI technologies. And AI, if it's being used to regulate human interventions, what's the ethics behind that? What if it's supporting geoengineering? That's not a neutral undertaking to think about. So how do we evaluate the ethical implications of AI when the core principle of defining values and creating ethical frameworks are not even neutral? If we are thinking about ethics from our point of view or from my point of view, we are promoting Western, educated, industrialized ideologies. And what happens when we want to think about data sovereignty? Who owns this data if we start taking it? On individuals, on communities, on indigenous populations, on species? Do they get to consent? And what about data colonization? We are taking data from people, especially if we're zooming out to the global south. We're just perpetuating neocolonial practices. What about biopiracy? If we're absorbing and benefiting from rich histories of traditional knowledge and utilizing it through AI, who has the ethical say in this? If we are integrating with indigenous cultures who are custodians of lands that we're trying to conserve and the species on those lands, we're monitoring their use, we're monitoring their rich biodiversity. Are they consenting? Do they want their information to be utilized by AI data scientists, by large corporations? So there's a lot, this is not neutral to think about, especially for climate and nature. And sustainable development. So one of the core focuses of our report is really to identify that, AI applications for climate and nature must not exacerbate existing inequalities. So this involves addressing biases. We've already seen AI, because it's trained on our data and we have inherent prejudices and biases inside of us that sort of reproduce systemic oppression. It is reproducing bias and biased outputs, and it is perpetuating these inequalities. So we need to make sure it's not continuing to do that. We also need to think about equality of access and opportunity. So across the world, we have a global digital divide. Countries like the United States, the Western nations, different countries across Asia have more access to the compute power, the infrastructure, and the resources, and the data. There are parts of the world where there really isn't data. And so also, if we're creating these solutions based on where there is data, it's not actually going to fit and work across the world. And we could risk exacerbating inequalities and deepening this digital divide. As we have here from Dr. Uwe Stewart from data.org, infrastructure, this is compute infrastructure, data infrastructure, is a form of climate justice. Also, we see this concentration of powerful AI capabilities and discourses in highly resourced players. I believe there is a stat that the majority of the AI citations are Google and Microsoft. And so if they're controlling the tools and the conversation, what does that mean for the rest of us? Are they representing us? These are profit-driven companies. And also, to sort of pivot away from that, if we want to exacerbate, or if we want to reduce the risk of AI exacerbating existing inequalities, anytime that we're developing a solution for a community or for people, we really need to have meaningful engagement with this population. We can't just develop things as climate data scientists in a silo. We need to break silos. That's how we're going to have transformative change, is actually doing it with and ultimately uplifting folks to contribute to their own futures and trajectories. So other opportunities, at the local scale, we apply these solutions and build workforces and capacities with historically marginalized and disadvantaged communities. And globally, we invest in infrastructure, initiatives, strong institutions, and education across the global south. A very hot off the press screenshot that I just got from a 5-minute conversation with Julius to look at the equality of opportunity. And he said he went to a talk recently and there was a presentation of the concentration of GPUs in the world. And basically Meta and Tesla have the lion's share, as well as Leonardo, a national entity. So this just goes to show that there is a high concentration of AI capabilities in this world. And it might not promote equality, inclusion, and equity. So there's a lot happening in this space right now on governance and safety. To ensure AI is ethical, is used ethically, it needs to exist in an ecosystem of technological governance. And there are governing bodies around the world, I would say, scrambling to enact such policies, given the recent pace of AI proliferation. So in the US and the EU, we have policies, and even the United Nations General Assembly is starting to talk about, how do we make sure this is moving forward in a way that we can control, that has fewer unintended consequences. When we're thinking about safety from the use cases that I've provided here today, some of the challenges, if we're looking at applications in the energy or power grid, could be blackouts. It could be catastrophic failures, worker injuries. It could be used to widely exploit resources. Can you imagine if highly fine-tuned precision agriculture wasn't taking into account natural limits or the need for land to fallow, or the benefit of biodiversity, and it was just trying to maximize profit and output? What about data breach by poachers? You have those conservation initiatives trying to track and understand species. What if the wrong folks got that? What if the wrong folks got a hold of a biodiversity accounting in the Amazon rainforest where they could identify illegal to harvest hardwoods? So we've got to be really careful about this stuff. Biden's issued an executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI, and the EU has the Artificial Intelligence Act in place. Now, sustainability, and I think this is my last consideration before I go to some of the closing opportunities and remarks. So this one's tricky. We know the computing power required to process and analyze massive amounts of data requires significant energy and water resources. Now, there is a nuance to this. Two ways to think about this. If we zoom out, and I want to acknowledge that I'm David Rolnuck, who's kind of the co-founder of Climate Change AI, has informed some of my thinking on this based on a recent talk. Zooming out, AI has all these use cases for climate and nature. This is great. What is AI being used for right now? Ads. It is being used to drive mass consumption. And we really have to remember, like, we are in a climate crisis, we're in a tipping point, things are kind of bad, and so we do need real change on this globe. And if we're still endlessly consuming, we're obviously not going to be getting there. So AI is driving mass consumption, and it's actually boosted production in the fossil fuel industry by 5%, is according to his stats. So that's, I think, $1 trillion. But on the flip side, it offers these opportunities to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, right? I gave you a demonstration of several. It can conserve water. There's the AI, every time you query ChatGPT, it drinks a cup of water. Now, it'll obviously, if we use it in all municipal pipe systems and it detects all the leaking pipes, it'll definitely mitigate that impact. Using these statistics, and I think it's right and it's important to think that way. But talking about AI in terms of energy use and water use, we also have to think about the other things that we do in this culture, in this society. We consume a lot of television, social media. Those are all also energy and water thirsty. We eat a lot of hamburgers. So when you think about AI and ChatGPT queries in the global system of how we utilize different resources, it nuances it, and it's actually significantly less than our global meat consumption. So kind of zooming back, okay, so we have some challenges with sustainability, but it is nuanced when we look at it from a bigger picture, both pros and cons. But there are opportunities to invest in lower cost, lower complexity models. And this was one of the big key points that came out of a recent talk I went to on AI for climate in Bonn. It's that, smaller AI tasks with simple, smart, and specific algorithms for specific use cases can be more effective than building this like overkill, large data, large foundation models. So really smaller and smarter AI could really be transformative, and in most cases is all we need to kind of unlock these climate and nature wins. Also, edge computing, tiny ML, these are other areas that we can explore more to sort of reduce the sustainability impacts of AI. Okay, so in the next 5 or so minutes, I just want to end with how do we accelerate progress, and then what's my big takeaway coming into this sort of as a newbie into AI about a year ago. So opportunities for transformative change. This is all also informed largely, of course, by my wonderful team that co-produced this report and Pierre Gentine. So one of the critical components is data. We need open data, open codes, open models to really continue to press and drive algorithmic and application developments. This requires this data availability plus centralization and benchmark data sets to sort of be able to, benefit and bring in the computer and scientific community to really, unleash its potential for innovation. The materials project is an example of a centralization hub where it is using AI to accelerate the development of new materials, and WeatherBench, of course, for benchmark data sets. Also, it's critical to address this issue of data scarcity and inequality, and the fact that we have We need to have more data in data poor regions so that we are not just creating AI solutions for already industrialized areas. And out of this report, the other two really critical things that came out. Oh, am I still here? Yeah. It's workforce development and interdisciplinarity. So we need to invest in the workforce, and I'm happy to see you all here. Importantly, though, there's this need for this sweet spot, this interdisciplinary skills. So folks who have this deep AI expertise, but also domain-specific knowledge. A Deloitte study from 2022 identified that AI specialists worldwide amounted to just 22,000 folks. And of course, job openings are outpacing the supply of skilled workers. But what's even more of a challenge to kind of engage with is thinking about, who can attract these AI specialists the most. We all know what Google and Meta, and Microsoft tech folks can get paid. Do you think an NGO trying to advance conservation efforts utilizing AI specialists and biologists are going to be able to have the same pay? There's an unbalance there. So it is a challenge. We need more AI specialists. We need interdisciplinary skills, but we also need a way to attract folks who are driven by the world, the problems, and who want to make the world a better place by applying their skills, their AI skills. And we see that these new interdisciplinary training programs are emerging. So right now, we have LEAP, of course, Oxford, UAlbany, a lot of different organizations and academic centers are working on creating this new workforce that's capable of tackling these critical problems with modern tools. And to end, and it always, in my line of work, it seems sort of trite. It's like so obvious, but we really need cross-disciplinary collaboration. And it's not just so that we can, understand what we're talking about, but it's really about framing the questions and enabling people to build solutions between domain experts, between policy leaders, and the AI community. So there's this critical role for folks who can work together and solve problems meaningfully and ask the right questions meaningfully. We need to break out of silos. That's another I think that's another way we are going to see transformative change is really breaking out of our silos. So I guess this is the throw back to Julius's question then. My closing remark is AI holds this immense potential for driving positive change, but it is just a tool. It's not a panacea. And we all, every day that we're interacting in this space, need to be critical and honest about the ways it can and can't help solve our climate and nature solutions. So another comment from David Worelnick is, we have to avoid techno-solutionism. AI is not always the solution, and it should not distract from other solutions. It's a means to the end, and it's not the end in itself. AI being applied to reduce waste and improve recycling in municipal areas, that's useful, but we still need to reduce our waste and reduce the things that are going to landfill. So my big, closing thought is AI solutions for climate and nature must be advocated alongside innovations and policy overhauls that actually address the social systems and economic paradigms that enable and perpetuate the climate and nature crises. AI can help us do this, but we've got a lot to do ourselves. So thank you so much.
So you mentioned energy grids and stuff like that, and you can imagine having, I don't know, a model or a digital twin that optimizes for various criteria that are beneficial to humanity. And you could also, I guess, think of something that larger that includes also tariffs or regulatory structures that incentivize certain use of certain technologies and so on and so forth. But what if the choices that were determined by that sort of system reduce profit for energy companies, for industries, or even for the AI groups like Meta or Google who advise them? Can these companies be necessarily trusted to make choices that are in the best interest of the public or citizens? Do we have to view ourselves as essentially having an antagonistic role or a kind of keeping in check what exactly are the interests of the Metas, the Googles, the Teslas, or so on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important question to think about. I don't know if we can trust them to act in the best public good, but I think that's why we have checks and balances. That's why we have a government that creates regulations. That's why we have a, non-governmental advocacy groups that press corporate actors. It's why we have academics in the room who push the question. I mean, I think that what goes wrong is when you don't have a government providing those checks and balances to make sure that corporations are acting in the public good, because we know historically they haven't been. So I don't really have the answer to you. I think it's just it's a dialogue, it's a discourse we need to constantly push and ensure that governments are acting responsibly, right?
This is also a fun one, which probably doesn't have an easy answer. But how do you convince people that open source models and open algorithm development is important? Because you've got countries who view it as a weapon, right? And historically, they'd lock 20 of their best folks in a room to develop weapons and not tell anybody about them. You have companies that are profiting off of it.
Yeah.
And if they tell other companies about this software, they will use that software to profit as well.
Yeah.
So what's like a good argument for convincing that open source modeling is the future, is a necessity?
Yeah. I don't know. I wonder if I can like pivot that in a way if Julius has a thought. I mean, I think it's like public, is it a public good? I again, as an outsider and a social scientist, I've actually been like really levitated by understanding the computer science community and how you have this sort of disruptive nature of coming together to push the boundaries and co-create in this really open source sort of way. So I don't know. I guess it's kind of like we have to look to you all who care about wanting to improve things and this being a mechanism. And of course, leveraging the academic community. Like that's one really good thing about us, even though this is a private institution, is we're not just solely private, profit driven, right? We're intellectual driven. Do you have a thought on how to promote the concept of open data sources?
It's also good for profit. I mean, we see
It's also-
that like all the open development on all the tools, like there's a reason that they open source that stuff. There's like free labor of like, and food, like, I mean, that's a really pessimistic way to look at it, but that's part of it for sure. And this sort of labor sharing, I think for me, that's just like creating efficiency, and like these big companies know about that, right? Like not redoing the wheel. And I think maybe I can pivot to my actual question here, because I think that is something we're actually not very good at as in academia as a whole. I think we need to like take a look at, I think you made like some very good remarks on like the role of academic research in sort of the system of checks and balances, which it maybe should work in a different way. But like the role there is very clear. And I think you also asked the question, where are the people who are motivated to forego a certain pay range and sort of work for the right thing? They're all right here. Like the fact that there's people sitting in this room, right? Like I feel like almost everyone in this room could like go to like the big companies, but there's still people who sit here and think that there's something like additionally to be gained. But I think my original question is like this creating silos. That is for me is like a hallmark thing of academia as it stands right now. So is the real problem to breaking this up actually academic structure? And by that, I mean sort of the overarching structure, not necessarily LEAP, which I think is going in the right direction, but we also need to be honest, we're bumping up against sort of pretty high level incentives that don't go this way. They go the exact opposite way. So is that really a problem for the future of AI as a public good?
Our silos, I think silos are, well, yeah, I think it's always going to be a problem. I think the academic, I think the university could play a role. And I'm going to borrow some research from some really good colleagues who put forward an opinion piece, but the university structure and tenure structure, someone's having a party somewhere down. Oh, nice. Okay. It rewards things based on these, how many publications can you get out? How many papers can you get out? It doesn't always reward this community-based science, this complicated partnership building, interdisciplinary stuff, which just goes slower and it's harder to have those traditional metrics. So I think, yes, we can it could be harder to have those traditional metrics, or you create new metrics. And so I think there's a role in the university and maybe some of the funding agencies to try to break down the challenges and the rewards and incentive structures that sort of perpetuate siloed work and siloed thinking. And I want to say it's really important to have really foundational basic science on one small thing too. We have to have both. But yeah, I think that's why it's transformative. It seems so simple, but it could be transformative if we can do it right.
Gonna go to the Zoom
Oh,
group
she's on
here.
Zoom.
Puneet, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Oh, yeah, sure. I was not expecting to be called onto the stage like that, but sure. I think to some degree, Geneva has already kind of touched upon this, but just thinking in terms of the political economy aspect of the AI governance and regulation conversation, I think I have a concern anyway that, some institutions that are tasked with overseeing and regulating AI, whether we're talking about climate, energy conservation, or some other use case, I sort of fear that there's going to be a combination of capture by industry forces, a lack of expertise within these regulatory or institutional bodies, as well as other maybe perverse incentives that are going to kind of combine to make it really tough for smart governance and oversight to become a reality. And I know that's kind of a pessimistic view of it all, but I'd be curious to hear, Geneva, what your thoughts are on whether we need certain kinds of higher level systems level changes, institutional changes, procedural changes, uh, in order to make these sorts of smarter regulations and smart oversight a reality, and not just something that we really want to see happen.
So I think I'm pushing up against my political economy knowledge base, but I think the answer is yes, we probably do need to look at structures, but I don't know what they are. Do you have ideas about what sort of changes structurally we might need? Maybe perhaps you.
I mean, I'm not a political economist by training. I know some things about political economy, but I mean, this is I guess is a $1 billion question or $1 trillion question, depending on how you want to look at it. I certainly don't know what that would be.
Yeah. I wonder if there's models in other kind of science policy spheres. I don't know what we could look to. I don't know how were nuclear regulations made, probably poorly to begin with. I don't know. I wonder if there's other models or looking to other countries to see if they approach regulation differently. But I don't have an answer for you. But I think that it's right. We do have to start thinking about other ways of looking at this structurally to actually ensure we're doing a good job and not getting that corporate capture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even if we don't have an answer right now, I hope that it's something that we all leave today thinking about more and maybe asking more in the conversations we have on this topic with other people. So, I mean, thank you so much again for your talk. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Thanks for bringing that question up.
I see we have, I think, 2 more questions in the room. We're coming up on 1 o'clock, so we'll have 2 more quick questions, and then we will thank Geneva for her time. Sammy, we'll start with you.
Oh, yeah. This is kind of a very specific question, but I was just wondering if you could tell me more about like the team that was like producing this work, because I think these are like really interesting questions. So like at the climate school, like what was the structure of like how this work was done, and what was the relationship with like the Bezos Foundation and then Pierre and stuff?
Yeah. Okay. So this was commissioned by and in collaboration with Bezos. So I think they directly sought out both Columbia University's engineering school and climate school, knowing our contribution to the space and particularly Pierre Gentine's leadership as lead author. And then myself and a colleague in the School of Engineering were brought on. So that it was a 3-person team plus a partnership specialist at Columbia. At at the University of Albany, we leveraged their AI Institute. So we had something like 7, I think, AI specialists. and folks who thinking about AI for, cybersecurity on the team and applied science. And then at Esri, we had basically a team of geospatial experts. So, I mean, of course, geospatial and satellite technologies is a huge part of how we can use AI for climate and nature. So that was sort of the core team. We brought in some brilliant students from Columbia Engineering, and we liaised quite frequently, actually, with the Bezos Earth Fund because, of course, they wanted this to inform their Grand Challenge launch. And so every month we would provide a presentation to their president about what we were finding. So we'd identify, it was a literature review. So the methodology primarily was just a massive literature review, hundreds and hundreds, internet scan, of course. And then we spoke with some 30 odd stakeholders, just informal conversations. And ultimately, we invited, I think, 15 other expert authors to review the sort of work we'd put out from a lit review and from conversations with experts. And then they contributed, that you might be missing this or have you thought about that? So that was leveraging sort of the broader Columbia faculty. That was the process. So I don't know if our page of acknowledgements and contributions is like, I don't know, 50 people long or something. That's another talk, how to write a Google Doc with 50 people, but we'll save that for another day. Last question.
Hi. So I wanted to piggyback off of Puneet's question because I do have some experience in political economy and just
Great.
wanted to have
Please.
offer some comments there. So I would say on the regulation question, it's definitely going to be really quite difficult in the years moving forward because the direction that legal jurisprudence around U.S. administrative law in this country has taken has really been to sort of shirk the government's obligation to bring on specialists in regulatory roles within the executive branch. There was a recent Supreme Court case, for instance, that overruled something called the Chevron doctrine, which was a legal principle that allowed for the U.S. government to engage in this type of very specialized rulemaking. That's been gutted by the Supreme Court. And then, of course, depending on how the presidential election goes, things could go one way or another on that front in terms of our ability to avoid things like regulatory capture, moral hazard, perverse incentives, that sort of thing. The second point, which was to what you were saying about sort of this infrastructural investment, particularly in global South countries and expanding equity and access. There's also a lot of challenges in terms of just how the international financial political economy is structured, in the sense that you have a lot of these countries that are saddled with foreign debts denominated in U.S. dollars, and even for basic things like roads and hospitals and schools, it's exceedingly difficult to get foreign aid money to build that type of infrastructure, let alone these more complicated, HPC centers around the world. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how to reform that international finance structure, and it's definitely like, if our local and national politics are difficult, that's just another level, So it's definitely going to be a long haul to be able to really restructure that system to allow for these types of investments to occur.
Well, please do keep thinking about it because we need people like you for a lifetime thinking about it and pushing it. And I mean, yeah, I think everything you've said is really, really brilliant. And, I'm a Canadian, so I can't say this, but one option is consider who you're voting for when you want to think about how you change regulatory structures and what future governance might look like. And one day, we are the future. We are going to be the leaders. We are going to change the narrative. We are going to be the decision makers. We can work in the in the international financial institutions. We can change the way debts are given, concessional loans, grants. We can alleviate debt loads. Like this has happened and it can happen. And so I think, we don't really have a choice. We're either going to be living in a very, very, very different world, that might be the case, or we take some actions to change it. So, we really don't, if we really want to see change, we have to make it happen. So we need these big, bold ideas, and we need to dedicate our lives thinking about how to actually implement them, because one day we're going to be in charge. That's it.
Great note to end on. Thank you so much, Geneva.